The gymnasium at Fairview Elementary had been decorated since 7 in the morning. Tobias Mercer knew this because he had been the one to arrive at 6:45, cardboard boxes stacked in the back of his Escalade, asking the janitor, a quiet man named Pete, if he could get started early. Pete had said yes without hesitation, the way people always said yes to Tobias, and so by the time the first bell rang and children began flooding the hallways, the gymnasium looked like something out of a magazine spread, streamers in gold and white, 3 folding tables pushed together and draped in a rented linen cloth, a cake from Brennan's Bakery on 5th, 4 tiers, with "Congratulations, Scientist," written in blue fondant across the top. His daughter Maggie had won the regional science fair. 11 years old, missing her 2 front teeth since February, obsessed with weather patterns in a way that made her teachers slightly uncomfortable, and her father extraordinarily proud. She had built a working barometric pressure tracker from parts she ordered online, and a cardboard box from the recycling bin. The judges had called it remarkably sophisticated for her age group. Tobias had printed the email and framed it. He had also, in the weeks following her win, called every parent in Maggie's class. Not personally, he had his assistant, Renata, handle the initial invitations, but he had followed up himself. 12 phone calls. He remembered the number because he had made them from his car, sitting in the parking garage beneath his office building, watching the number on his phone screen and telling himself this was not unusual, that parents did this, that it was normal to want your child's celebration to mean something. 12 calls. 8 of them went to voicemail and were never returned. 3 parents had said yes, and then, one by one, texted Renata in the days before the party with excuses that ranged from a family conflict has come up to, memorably, "We have plans that day," without specifying what plans. One parent had picked up on the first ring. "Of course we'll come," she had said, and Tobias had felt something unlock in his chest that he hadn't even realized was locked. Maggie is a wonderful girl. Our Rosie talks about her all the time. He hadn't known who Rosie was. He'd had to ask Renata to pull Maggie's class roster. Rosie Vance, daughter of Connie Vance, who worked double shifts at the county hospital as a floor aide, and lived in the apartment complex on the other side of the train tracks from Fairview. Tobias had driven past that complex twice a week for 4 years without ever really seeing it. The morning of the party, Tobias woke at 5:30 and stood at the kitchen window with his coffee, looking out at the backyard. The oak tree he and his wife Sylvia had planted when Maggie was born was dropping its leaves early this year. The yard looked sparse and a little sorry. He thought about Sylvia, the way he always did in the quiet moments, in the particular silence of early morning, when the house hadn't yet decided what kind of day it was going to be. She had been gone 4 years now. Pancreatic cancer, swift and merciless. Maggie had been 7. She remembered her mother in the way children remember things they are too young to hold. In fragments, in feelings, in the particular way she still sometimes reached for a hand that wasn't there. He got to the school by 6:45. By 11 o'clock, the gymnasium was full of light and empty of children. Tobias stood near the cake table and looked at his watch. The party was scheduled for 11 to 1. Parents had been told they could drop off or stay. The streamers shifted slightly in the air from the gymnasium's heating vents. Pete, the janitor, walked past the open door, saw Tobias standing there alone, and looked away quickly in the way of a man who understood suffering but had no tools to address it. Maggie was sitting on the bleachers on the far side of the gym, in her good dress, navy blue with a white collar, which she had chosen herself, with her barometric pressure tracker on the bench beside her, and her hands folded in her lap. She was looking at the door. Tobias crossed the gymnasium. He sat down beside her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "Dad," Maggie said finally. "Yeah, sweetheart, is it possible they all just got the wrong gym?" He looked at her. She was watching the door still, her voice careful and steady in the way of a child who has decided not to cry because she can see it would hurt her father. "It's possible," he said. She nodded slowly. "Okay. Then, after a pause, can we still have the cake?" Something moved through Tobias Mercer in that moment, something that had no clean name. Not quite grief, and not quite rage, and not quite love, though it contained parts of all 3. He put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. She leaned into him, still watching the door, still hoping, the way children hope even when the evidence is clear. "We can absolutely have the cake," he said. It was 11:23 when the gymnasium door opened. Tobias looked up expecting Pete, or perhaps the principal coming to offer her practiced sympathy. Instead, a woman stepped in, small, round-faced, wearing scrubs beneath an unzipped winter coat as though she had come straight from a shift, and behind her, a girl. The girl was maybe 10, thin in the way of children who are growing fast and eating whatever there is. She had 2 braids, slightly uneven, and she was carrying a gift wrapped in the Sunday comics section of a newspaper, tied with a piece of red ribbon. She was looking around the gymnasium with wide eyes, at the streamers, the linen tablecloth, the 4-tiered cake, and then she found Maggie on the bleachers, and something in her face settled, the way a compass needle settles when it finds north. "Rosie," Maggie said. She stood up. "Sorry we're late," the woman in scrubs said, a little breathless. "My shift ran over. I'm Connie. We spoke on the phone. You came," Tobias said. He heard his own voice and barely recognized it. "Of course we came." Connie said it simply without performances, in the tone of someone stating a fact about the world. Then she looked at the gymnasium, at its careful decorations and its absence of guests, and she didn't say anything about that, which Tobias thought was one of the kindest things a person had ever not said to him. Rosie crossed the gymnasium floor to where Maggie stood by the bleachers. She held out the newspaper-wrapped gift. "I made it," she said. "Kind of. My mom helped with the glue gun." Maggie took it. She turned it over in her hands. "What is it? Open it." Maggie peeled away the newspaper carefully. She was a child who saved wrapping paper, who smoothed it flat and put it in a drawer, and inside was a small wooden box, painted blue, with a round glass face set into the lid. Inside the glass face was a dial. "It's a barometer," Rosie said. "A little one. For her room." She hesitated. "I looked up how to make one after I saw yours at the fair. Yours is better. Mine's just decorative. But I thought—" She stopped, started again. "I thought it could be like a set." Maggie looked at the little wooden barometer for a long time. "This is the best present I've ever gotten," she said. Rosie's face did something complicated and then broke into a grin that showed she was also missing her 2 front teeth, which made Maggie laugh out loud, surprised, and then they were both laughing for reasons neither of them could have fully explained. Connie sat down next to Tobias. She accepted the cup of punch he poured her. They watched their daughters. "She worked on it for 2 weeks, Connie said quietly. "She was afraid it wasn't good enough. I kept telling her Maggie would love it." "She was right," Tobias said. "You were both right." They stayed for 2 hours. They ate cake, all 4 of them, at the big table with the linen cloth, which Tobias thought looked less absurd with people at it. Rosie asked Maggie 17 questions about the barometric pressure tracker, careful and specific questions, the kind that indicated she had done research. Maggie answered each one with increasing animation, leaning over the tracker, pointing at components, using technical vocabulary she usually kept to herself because the other kids in her class looked bored when she used it. Rosie did not look bored. Rosie looked like someone who had found a door she had not known was there. Connie told Tobias that she had 3 more hours before her evening shift. She said it without complaint, just as information about her day, and Tobias thought about the 12 parents who had not returned his calls and tried to do the math of their days. The soccer practices and the standing branch reservations, against Connie's double shifts and her scrubs and her daughter's newspaper-wrapped gift made from a glue gun and 2 weeks of trying. He could not make the math work in any way that reflected well on him. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Connie looked at him. "Did anyone else come? I mean," he stopped. "Do you know if any of the other parents were planning to come?" Connie was quiet for a moment. "A few of the moms have a group chat," she said carefully. "I'm not in it, but I've heard." She set down her cup. "There are some parents who, they worry about what their kids pick up from other kids. Values, priorities." She said the words without inflection. "Maggie is a wonderful child. She's kind, and she's brilliant, and she doesn't care what your sneakers cost. For some parents, that's not." She glanced toward where Rosie was now helping Maggie dismantle and reassemble part of the tracker. "For some parents, that's not the kind of influence they're looking for." Tobias looked at his hands. "She doesn't have the right sneakers," he said. "Maggie. She has the right sneakers. I mean, we have—" He stopped. "She has everything. I don't understand." "It's not about the sneakers," Connie said gently. He did know that. He had known it when he was making the 12 calls. He had known it when Renata had forwarded him the text messages with their careful excuses. He had known it in the way that people know things they do not want to look at directly, in his peripheral vision, always slightly out of focus. The truth was this. Maggie had spent most of the 4th grade talking about weather patterns. She had corrected her teacher about cumulus clouds in front of the whole class. She had brought a rain gauge to show and tell. She was not difficult or unkind. She was just entirely herself, which is a quality that the world admires in adults and makes nervous in children, particularly in children who live in neighborhoods where the houses have 3-car garages and the HOA has opinions about lawn decorations. The other children weren't cruel to her, exactly. They simply arranged themselves around her the way water arranged itself around a stone, finding the path of least resistance, flowing past without touching. Tobias knew this. He had known it. He had thrown a party because he had thought, if I make it big enough, if I make it wonderful enough, they will come. They will see how wonderful she is. They will understand. He had been wrong about that, and he had known he was going to be wrong about it, even as he ordered the 4-tiered cake. I keep thinking, he said, that if I do enough, that if I, he stopped, make it easier for them to include her, Connie said. Yes, that's not a you problem, Connie said. That's a them problem that looks like a you problem. He sat with that for a moment. Rosie was like that for a while too, Connie said, in 2nd grade. She came home one day and told me that Emma Hartfield said her lunch smelled bad. She picked up her cup again, turned it in her hands. I wanted to call Emma Hartfield's mother. I wanted to go up to that school and... She smiled, a little rueful. But what I did was I asked Rosie, is Emma Hartfield someone whose opinion you actually value? And Rosie thought about it very seriously, the way she thinks about things, and she said, no, not really. And I said, then let that be the end of it. Did it work? She still eats lunch alone sometimes, Connie said, but she doesn't come home crying anymore. She paused. She comes home curious, that's different. Across the gymnasium, Maggie was explaining something about pressure differentials, her hands moving. Rosie was nodding, chin in her hand, completely absorbed. She hasn't had anyone to talk to about this stuff, Tobias said. Not like that. Not someone who actually... I know, Connie said. Neither has Rosie. At 12:55, Connie stood and said she needed to get Rosie home before her shift. Tobias walked them to the parking lot. Connie's car was a 10-year-old Civic with a cracked side mirror, held in place with electrical tape in a way that suggested it had been cracked for long enough that tape had become a permanent solution. Maggie and Rosie stood on the sidewalk. Can you come over sometime? Maggie said. To my house? I have more stuff I want to show you. I'm working on a new project. It's about... She stopped herself. Actually, I don't want to say what it's about yet, because I haven't figured out the hypothesis. But I think you'd think it was interesting. I think it's interesting already, Rosie said, and I don't even know what it is. Maggie smiled. It was the smile Tobias thought of as her real one, not the posed one from school photos, but the loose, unguarded one that Sylvia had passed down to her, the one that changed her whole face. That's exactly the right answer, she said. Rosie got into the back seat of the Civic. Connie turned to Tobias. Thank you for the cake, she said. Honestly, it was the best cake I've had in years. Thank you for coming, he said. He meant it in the way of someone who had been thirsty for a long time and had just been handed a glass of water by a stranger who hadn't thought twice about it. He stood in the parking lot until the Civic's taillights disappeared around the corner. Behind him, Maggie was pulling streamers down from the gymnasium walls, not sadly but efficiently, the way she approached most things. He went back inside to help. They worked in comfortable silence, folding the linen cloth, stacking the extra cups. Dad, Maggie said. Yeah, I think today was actually pretty good. He looked at her. She was carrying a bundle of gold streamers under one arm and her barometric pressure tracker under the other. The little wooden barometer Rosie had made was sitting on top of the tracker, nestled there like it had always belonged. I think so too, he said. I don't think the other kids would have understood about the tracker anyway, she said, not bitterly, just as an assessment. Rosie asked about the Bourdon tube. Nobody ever asks about the Bourdon tube. Nobody ever asks about the Bourdon tube, he agreed. She nodded, satisfied. Next time we should just invite Rosie from the beginning, she said, and save the big cake for something that's actually worth the big cake. He thought about that on the drive home, about what was actually worth the big cake, about the difference between the celebration you perform and the celebration you actually have. About 12 phone calls and one that was answered, and how it turned out that one was enough, more than enough, and how he had almost missed it by spending so much time counting the ones that went unanswered. He thought about Pete, the janitor, who had opened the school at 6:45 without being asked. He thought about Connie in her scrubs 3 more hours before her evening shift, sitting in a school gymnasium eating 4-tiered cake and talking to him like a person deserving of a straight answer. He thought about a little wooden barometer made with a glue gun and 2 weeks of trying, wrapped in the Sunday comics. He thought about Sylvia, who had told him once, years ago, early in their marriage, during an argument he couldn't even remember, that the problem with him was that he always wanted to fix the room instead of just being in it. She had not meant it as a compliment. She had been right. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Maggie was asleep in the back seat, her head tilted against the window, the little barometer held loosely in her hands even in sleep. Outside, the afternoon light was doing something particular and golden with the clouds, the kind of light that a meteorologist would have a name for, and that most people just called beautiful. He drove home. He left the streamers in the trunk for tomorrow. He made dinner pasta from a jar, which Maggie liked better than the homemade sauce he spent hours on, and they ate at the kitchen table, and she told him 3 facts about cold fronts, and he told her about a meeting he'd had that week that had not gone the way he planned. And she listened with her chin in her hand the same way Rosie had listened in the gymnasium, and he thought, this is the room I am supposed to be in. He called Connie Vance the next morning and asked if Rosie was free the following Saturday. Connie laughed, not a polite laugh but a real one, surprised and warm. She's been asking me every hour since we got home, Connie said. They came at 10 o'clock. Rosie had a notebook this time, with questions she'd written down during the week. Maggie was waiting at the door before the Civic had fully stopped. Tobias made coffee for himself and Connie. They sat at the kitchen table while their daughters disappeared into the backyard with a wind vane kit Tobias had ordered online and 2 umbrellas, for reasons that were explained to him at length and that he only partially followed. Did she sleep last night? He asked. Connie shook her head. Kept getting up to write down more questions, Maggie too. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, through the kitchen window, the 2 girls were arguing cheerfully about which direction was true north, both of them pointing in slightly different directions with the certainty of scientists who had not yet learned to be uncertain. The oak tree was still dropping its leaves. The yard looked a little less sorry with people in it. Tobias watched his daughter and thought about the room he was supposed to be in, and for the first time in 4 years, it felt like exactly the right size.